Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. Is my mic working? Can you hear? Okay, there we go. Well, it's great to be here, and I am comfortable on a basketball court. Actually, I played college basketball, so it's nice to be here and try to score the winning goal. But anyway, what I'd like to do is sort of walk you through our journey in the exploration of the Titanic, sort of past, present, and some thoughts about the future. Now, my journey to the Titanic came in a very different way. First place, I was born in Wichita, Kansas, where all oceanographers come from. But shortly after being born in Wichita, our house was blown by a tornado, not to Oz, but to San Diego. My father was a test flight engineer during the war, and I grew up in San Diego and fell in love with the ocean. My passion was to be Captain Nemo. That's what I wanted to be. And my parents actually worked with me on that passion. But that certainly, because of Captain Nemo had a submarine, it was a wonderful series of coincidences that, as an Army intelligence officer during Vietnam, I ended up in the United States Navy. Still don't know how that happened. And I was assigned to this deep diving submarine at Woods Hole up the street in Massachusetts. And for 30 years, that was where I conducted my explorations. And going down to the bottom of the ocean, my background, as you know, or maybe you don't know, is I got my PhD. Let's see if we get this thing going here. How are we doing? There we go. My PhD I got here at the Graduate School of Oceanography at URI, so I'm a RAM, I want you to know. And so my degree was in marine geology. I had a passion for exploring the bottom of the ocean. And to do that, the best way to do that was to climb inside this little deep diving submarine and go to the bottom of the ocean. And I did it for over 2.5 decades. I made hundreds and hundreds of dives going down in this submarine to explore the bottom of the ocean. The frustration I had in the process was to get in a submarine. The average depth of the ocean is 12,000 feet. 50% of the world's oceans is deeper than 12,000 feet. But just going to the average depth, and that's exactly where the Titanic was. It sits at the average depth. So to get down to the Titanic in a deep diving submarine took you 2.5 hours in the morning to get to work and 2.5 hours in the afternoon to get home. So I had a 5-hour commute to work every day at the office. And my average bottom time was just about 3 hours, and the average distance I traveled in that day of exploration was 1 nautical mile. So very frustrating because I spend more time going in the vertical than in the horizontal. And so I began to dream, and I actually published this cartoon in the 1981 issue of National Geographic magazine. And it was about a whole new way of exploring. We call it telepresence. Instead of sending your physical body to the ocean, which is fragile and must be protected by a pressure housing, we wanted to literally have an out-of-body experience. And that is to send our spirit. Our spirit has no mass, it can travel at the speed of light, and it's indestructible. And in fact, when I look at my body and I look at my hand, I don't think of that as me. I think of it as an amazing piece of machinery, but I think that my spirit is the important part. And so the whole idea of this technology was to literally leave my body. And in fact, the final example of that would be what we just saw in Jim Cameron's movie Avatar, when the person left his physical body and went into a Navia's body. And I'm assuming a lot of you saw the movie Avatar, because to me it's a very futuristic look at where I see the technology taking us. And if you remember, the person was transported into this new body, and you may remember the first thing the person did when he found himself inside a Navia's body was to get up and run out the room. And the reason he got up and ran out of the room is because in his human body his legs didn't work. But in the Navia's body he had legs. He didn't care that he was 9 feet tall and green. He could run. And this is really where we're talking about. So what we're doing here at URI and down at the Graduate School of Oceanography is not only pioneering exploration of the oceans, but really pioneering a fundamentally new paradigm in how humans are going to be acting. I have a young boy and a young daughter who are, live in the cloud. And my son's girlfriend presently is in India doing an advanced course in yoga or something. And I go into his room, and his laptop was up, and there's his girlfriend on the laptop, and she's got her laptop up. And they weren't even talking to one another. They were going about doing their own thing in their room, but then they would periodically come over and chat. And then they would go back to what they were doing. And I asked my son, I said, "Hi, Lyra," that's his girlfriend. I said, "Ben, can you give me the latitude and longitude of where you are right now?" He said, "Dad, I'm in the cloud. It has no latitude and longitude." Now, those children look like us, but they're really not us. Okay. They're aliens, and they are the generation that are living in the cloud. And that's what this technology is really all about, is about living in the cloud. And we began to develop this technology, and this became the modern version of the design. And this was the design where I began the development of this technology. But the concept behind it was, instead of sending my body to the bottom of the ocean, I'd send my spirit. And that would become my navia, an underwater version of an exoskeleton. That would become me. And when I'm operating Hercules, I actually think I'm in Hercules. So this was the design paradigm. And we began to develop this whole new way of developing our exploration, because the beauty of this technology is, once you put the vehicle down, once you put your navia down, your exoskeleton down, you had no reason to bring it up, because you could move spirits in and out of it at the speed of light through the fiber optic cable. So all of a sudden, instead of 3 hours on the bottom, it's 24 hours on the bottom. And it became all of us could be on the bottom at the same time. And in fact, ultimately, we don't even have to be on the ship. We can be right here on land. And we began the development of this technology. It took 29 years to get us to where we are now, down at the lower campus. But my first application of this technology was the search for the Titanic. Now, the problem was I couldn't get anyone to fund it. So I went, having served in the United States Navy, I cut a deal with the Navy who said, "Well, actually, we developed your technology." The Navy sponsored the development of this technology. He says, "We have a reason for developing this technology. We have some things we'd like you to do for us." And it was all classified. I'd have to kill you back then, but I can tell you now because they declassified everything, but not everything, but that. But my real mission that summer in 1975 was not to find the Titanic. That was what I wanted to do. But my mission for the Navy, who was paying the bill, was to explore two submarines that we lost during the Cold War, the Thresher and the Scorpion. And both of these nuclear submarines went down with all hands. And in the case of the Scorpion, actually went down with nuclear weapons. We don't like leaving those things around. And so my job was to actually track down and map these submarines and locate those nuclear weapons. But we didn't want the Soviets to know that we were doing this. We didn't want to say, "Just follow us and we'll lead you to some of our weapon systems." And so the Titanic became the classified cover. Now, the funny thing was, the Pentagon was furious when I found the Titanic, because they said, "No, you weren't supposed to find it. You were supposed to just talk about finding it." And that was quite a day in the Pentagon when I discovered the Titanic, and the E-ring was buzzing with that discovery. But I did learn something very important about the Thresher and the Scorpion that led me to finding the Titanic. And that was that both of these submarines tragically imploded on their way down. Once they passed their collapse step, they went off like bombs. And all of this debris came throwing out of both submarines. But instead of landing straight down in a circle on the bottom, the heavy objects like the nuclear reactors or the forward torpedo room or whatever, that went straight down because it was so heavy. But lighter material was carried by the current and led to a tremendous long debris trail. And that gave me the idea, because see, when we did this, the research on the Titanic, all of us, I was the fourth attempt to find the Titanic. There were three other groups, actually 4 other times, that went out to search for the Titanic. And we all had the same database. We all knew the story of the Titanic sinking. And we all went into the literature, and we all looked at all of the California and the Titanic and the Carpathia, and all of us looked at this database, and to give you a sense of scale, that's about 10 miles right there. So that's 10, 20, 30, 40 miles. That's a big piece of real estate. Also, not only was there a lot of uncertainty, no one believed that the Titanic sank where it said it sank. When it sank, as you know, it first sent out its come quick distress signal, but it was the first to ever send out an SOS. But it gave that location, and you can see why. All the ships came to that location because that was what they reported to where they were. None of us ever believed that the Titanic was here because it hit the first iceberg it ran into. So we all believed that it sank on the eastern side of the ice field. See, the ships had stopped like the California, so everyone believed that that would probably be the western boundary. And it was actually the Carpathia that became the critical piece of information. Well, there are two critical pieces of information in figuring out where the Titanic went down. Number one was the Carpathia. The Carpathia had actually crossed, it was going the opposite direction that night. It had left New York and it was on its way to England when it received the distress call, and it turned and headed towards the reported position, but encountered the lifeboats here. That was a critical piece of information. The other critical piece of information was the ship that didn't do anything, the California, that sat on the horizon and did not respond to the Titanic's distress calls. But what we got from its logbook was the drift of the current that night on a bearing of 170 at a speed of 0.7 knots. So we got the bearing of the Labrador current and its speed, and that became critical in our hunt, and I'll explain that to you in a second. But this was basically the search area that all of us had, 100 square miles, with the lifeboats coming here. Now, the traditional, so here's the Carpathia coming and picking up the lifeboats. No one ever, like I say, we did not put the reported position even in the box. So that was the search area of the Titanic. The problem was, running through the search area was a submarine canyon. So we had a deep canyon running through it, so it's like losing it in the Grand Canyon. It's a very different search strategy than out in a parking lot. So now we had a possibility the Titanic could be hiding in a canyon. Now, the traditional way to search for anything was to do what we call side scan sonar. Okay, and the idea of a side scan sonar, think of it as if you were mowing the lawn. A side scan sonar looks out to the left, looks out to the right, and it goes along and it mows along. So think of that as this is my blade of my sonar. And then I turn around and I overlap my tires and I just mow the lawn. Back and forth until there's every blade of grass is cut. And the problem is when you introduce a canyon, you have to do tighter lines because there could be a shadow zone here. The Titanic could be hiding up against the wall of the canyon, not seen by the sonar, so it would have to come in with another one tighter in, which makes it even more lawn mowing. So instead of mowing 100% of the grass, you have to mow 150% of the grass. So it becomes a very laborious search pattern. I'll get to this in a second. But that was the traditional way of finding things. And the first effort all used side scan sonar. Now, our partner in this discovery were the French. They actually were supposed to find the Titanic. When I teamed up with the French, I knew that previous searchers had 60 days to find the Titanic. And I knew that by the time I finished my military operations, I would only have 12 days. So I only had 12 days when my competition had 60. So I invited the French to help me find it. And they were supposed to find it, and I was supposed to film it. And so they had one of these side scan sonars, and they went out and they began mowing the lawn. Okay, so there's the original box. We later expanded it. And the idea of the French was to mow the entire box. Jean-Louis Michel says, I'm going to mow every blade of grass. Now, the reason I'm standing here tonight talking about the discovery of the Titanic is because on the first line, the French went south and the wind and seas pushed their ship slightly to the south. And they missed the Titanic on their first line by 200 meters. All right? Thank you very much. So, and then they naturally mowed along and never got back to that little sliver. That's where the Titanic ended up. Well, I'm jumping forward a little. So they did a lot of work, but then when they didn't find it, we got really nervous. We thought, well, my gosh. So we enlarged the search box, and now it became 150 square miles, with half of it done. But they had 60 days to make that. We had 12 days. And so I had to come up with this other strategy. And that strategy was, instead of looking for the ship, I would assume that the Titanic broke in half, which was a gamble because Walter Lord's book, A Night to Remember, had it sinking in one piece. But an eyewitness said it broke in half, Jack Thayer, and I went with him because it fit what I needed to break in half. So I gambled. And I said, well, if the Titanic broke in half, it would have done the same thing the Thresher and Scorpion done, is all this stuff would have come out, the boilers would have gone straight down, the bow would have gone, but all this other stuff would have gone trailing away. And so instead of looking for the Titanic, I looked for its trail. It's as if I was photographing a deer in the winter, and it's hiding in the woods, you look for its footprints in the snow. And so I set up a search strategy, and I assumed that I was looking for a debris field. This was my model, told me that the debris field should be about that long, just a little over a mile. It should be north-south, because that's the current that night. And it should go from heavy debris to light debris. The question is, where do you start? Now, when you do these search strategies, and I've done many, many, many hunts, and you take all the data that you have and you put it in your computer and you ask your computer, where is it? The computer will religiously say it's right there, and it never is right there. Okay. The computer will always give you an answer, but it's always wrong. And the problem is if you go to where the computer says it is, and it isn't there, you're lost. It's equal probability in all directions. Now you don't know what to do. Do I go left, right? It's equal probability away from that predicted spot. So the key is never go where the computer says it is. Always go to where it definitely isn't. But you have a definite direction. So I said, what's the lightest material that ever came out of the Titanic that night? The lifeboats. They didn't sink at all. So if I went to where the Carpathia picked up the lifeboats and added an air of celestial navigation, back then is about 5 nautical miles, I said if I went 5 nautical miles south of where the Carpathia said it is, it has to be north. You always want to know it's that way, not, I don't know. Okay. So we started here, line 1, and instead of mowing the lawn, which we didn't have time to do, we spaced our lines 0.9 miles apart. And we could get through it real quick. And we went slicing through, and sure enough, on our ninth run, we came in on the debris field, turned north, and walked it into the Titanic. You gotta love it, you know? Anyway, so that was our hunt. That first, science is great. So here we are, lowering our vehicle, beginning our hunt, and again, because the vehicle doesn't have to come up, I can stay down 24 hours a day, 24/7. And there we are. I'm a little, I don't think I can get in that anymore, but anyway. Close. Certainly had more hair back then. But anyway, that is our moment of discovery. We picked up the debris field, so we came in on the debris field, and then we turned. And we didn't know initially if it was the Titanic. It was just stuff. And this was the same place that the convoy routes during World War II, years later, and they sunk a lot of ships, the Germans did. So we actually expected to find other things. So when we came in on this debris field, we didn't know. But then we came over the boiler. And we had a picture of that boiler on the wall. And we knew we had it. And then we walked it up and came in on the bow. Now, the weather set in. This is where they made the movie The Perfect Storm. So we had to clear out. We got blown out after a couple days. They only had 4 days to look at the ship. And then we had to wait a year to come back. And we came back with our submarine. We brought our first little robot, Jason Jr., a miniature version of the one we were going to build, JJ. And we went down to the Titanic and relocated it, and then did a marvelous exploration of it with our vehicle system, little JJ. And we went down the grand staircase. I'll never forget going down the grand staircase. And we were sort of scared. It was scary because we thought we were inside that robot. And when you get when you're driving the robot, you're convinced you're in it. And so imagine, we used this wall here because we didn't want to get disoriented because the whole grand staircase was gone. It was just a big shaft, a big elevator shaft. And we went down it, and we're imagining us looking at our screen, but we think we're inside the robot. And we turn, and a light comes on in front of us. I mean, talk about extraterrestrial. I mean, a light came on in front of us, and we first place we about had a heart attack, and then we realized, oh yeah, that's the robot, it's not us. We can now. So we went over and we looked at where the light, and it was actually a chandelier shining our lights back at us. That was sort of frightful. But anyway, but that year we made a complete mosaic of the ship. And we made a complete mosaic of the ship and published it in National Geographic magazine. And I'll get back to that in a second. Years later, now, we now sit on the sidelines for years and years and years, and we're watching all the salvagers, all the grave robbers going out. We're watching all the tour dives. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dives are being made on the Titanic, mostly by France and Russia. And so finally we came back in 2004, and we said, let's go back and see what's happened to the Titanic since our discovery. And we went with a new version, and that became the system we have here, the Hercules and Argus system. This is the present generation vehicle system that I now have. This is my new exoskeleton. I love it. I love being inside this robot. And so we went down and we explored. We brought a giant lighting system called Argus that is sort of the eye in the sky, but it also gives us this beautiful view of what's beneath us. So we work under the lights of this artificial sun. And here it is lighting up the bow of the Titanic. There's our cable back. You got to be a little careful about wrapping things. But we're now down on the bow, and we're exploring, seeing the massive anchors. I would be about this tall. That's how big these anchors are. They're gigantic anchors. And we collected, you just saw some of the footage as we were getting ready to do the program. We collected 250 hours of imagery, and it was quite amazing. This is where Leonardo was standing when he says, I'm king of the world. But anyway, this is up in the bow. But it was quite miraculous. But we could start to see what the beauty of the ROVs, as opposed to the submarines, and I'll talk about the damage they're doing. The ROV, you can hover. You can get within an inch of something. And look how close we are to the telemotor, because the ROV it's not in contact. It can get extremely close, but it doesn't touch. And then we put it in what we call closed loop control. This was our mapping, so there's our depth. And we began doing a systematic mosaic of the ship and created a new one. Okay? So now we've got one that are almost 20 years apart. So we can now put those two together and show you what's happened to the Titanic in time. And what we've seen now this was done film, this was digital, but I'll be blowing this up, but you could see the damage being done by the submarines. Crow's nest, no crow's nest. Right here, you can see where they're landing. And the important thing to look at is to look at where a submarine can land and where a submarine can't land. And where they can't land, there's no damage. They're identical. Where they can land, you can see all the damage. And that's what we've been able to document, is the damage. That is where a submarine lands. See, it crushes the deck, exposes a fresh surface that's orange. So whenever you see orange, you know that's a recently exposed surface of the Titanic, and most of the time caused by a submarine. Here is the crow's nest. When we saw it, the French knocked it off. This light there, now on display. So even though they said they didn't take anything off the Titanic, they were dumb enough to take the ones and show them, and we have pictures of them attached to the Titanic. This is all this damage where submarines are landing up by the Marconi room. See all the damage? Amazing amount of damage done by the submarine. But see, we're able to hover and not touch at all. I don't have any problem of submarines visiting it. If you have a spare $63,000, you can buy a ticket. But I have no trouble with people visiting. But you don't go to the Louvre and stick your finger in the Mona Lisa. And that's what we're talking about. Is trying to look at how do we move forward in conservation, preservation. And I'll talk about it. Trash everywhere down there. All sorts of trash. I mean, the protocol when you're above a historical site is you don't dump your trash. And the salvagers, when they pick up something, they have to leave something of equal weight. So all around the Titanic is just the trash that they've left from their salvage operations. Everywhere you go is all this trash. And the thing that really disturbs me most about it is when we were exploring it, everything down there is gigantic, and you can get quickly sidetracked on big things. But to me, the most compelling images are images like this. That's where that was a body. Remember that after the Titanic sank, the Titanic went to the bottom at 45 miles an hour and crashed into the bottom very quickly. But the water was so freezing cold that night, and it took about 20 minutes for them to die. If they weren't in a lifeboat, they died. They died in about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. If they had a life jacket, many of the bodies were found, and most of them are buried in Halifax. But many people didn't have any life jackets. Hundreds and hundreds of people died, and then a rain of human bodies came raining down all across the Titanic debris field. Animals quickly found them and removed their flesh. And the deep sea at that temperature is undersaturated in calcium carbonate, which is what your bones are made out of. And the skeleton will actually dissolve in the deep oceans. It takes about 5 years. But what's left behind, where it used to be attached to the body, are the shoes, because of the tannic acid that goes into the leathering process. So everywhere around the Titanic are pairs of shoes, of sailors' shoes. This is pretty powerful, a mother with her daughter that died together in a second-class cabin. We can tell by the bowl and the tile. My position is you don't go to Gettysburg with a shovel. You don't take belt buckles off the Arizona. There was nothing to learn. All the artifacts in the Titanic were identical to the artifacts on her sister ship. So if you want a teacup from the White Star Line, get it on eBay from the Olympic. My vision is actually to turn the Titanic into an underwater museum. Now, the next few slides, you're going to say, I'm crazy. I am crazy, so let's not worry about that. I'm applying for a permit to clean and paint the Titanic. Okay, how am I going to do that? When I found the Titanic, my first view of the Titanic was right here. And I came in on it, you don't see it far away, and all of a sudden I came in here and it was a wall of steel rising out of sight. And this is the picture, the first picture I ever took. That is the bilge keel. The bilge keel is this little bilge keel. It's a little flange that helps it from rolling. Right from here, the picture is taken right here, and you see the anti-fouling paint still working. This drip's coming from there's no marine fouling, and there's no rusting of that surface. Now, obviously, they didn't think to paint the whole ship anti-fouling paint. But we now do that with supertankers. When we build supertankers now, they're so large we can't dry dock them. And there actually is technology to clean and paint supertankers underwater. And the kind of technology they use both above water and below water is they have these little cleaners, and they go on with a magnet. They attach to the hull, and they just go along, and they clean the hull. Here they are, just cleaning the hull. And then you can actually apply, this is underwater version of it, but just get rid of that guy and just take it deeper. And you can actually paint underwater. They now have epoxy paints that you can apply underwater. Now, when I talk to people about this, adults sort of roll their eyes. Kids say, what color are you going to paint it? They quickly leap over whether I can do it or not. And we've actually decided to paint it a rusty color so that it looks like it looked back then. So what we want to do, see, the key with the Titanic, let me back up here for a second. The key is don't let the ship splay open. That's the important thing to not have. Fortunately, it went into the bow. This anchor, I can stand on the bottom of the ocean and touch the anchor. That's 60 feet of the ship is in the bottom. So the nose is in the bottom, which by its mere force, and it was 4 days old when it went in. And the mud's anoxic. So actually, if I excavate it here, which I don't suggest, you will see a beautiful paint job. That should be beautiful paint from 4 days old in that anoxic mud. So that is already holding it together. But what you want is you don't want this ship to splay. And the reason for that is as you go deeper into the Titanic, I don't know if you saw the last issue of National Geographic, when they went into the Turkish bath, with the deeper into the ship, the more preserved it is. There's no internal circulation. It goes anoxic. So we were seeing furniture, we were seeing organic material, probably people at some point, that are perfectly preserved the deeper you go into the ship because there's no internal circulation. You can also put preservatives inside. So to do this, I estimate it won't take me much. I obviously will concentrate on the flat surfaces that I can, so the rivets are painted and they don't splay. If it's working for 100 years, I only have to do it once in another 100 years. So that is actually the plan, because then you can actually broadcast that. So how are we going to do that? Well, we have that technology. As you know, our program down at the lower campus is to explore the world's oceans with these highly advanced robotic technologies. Remember that the cartoon, and remember that what we want to do is to create a telepresence. So it won't be that difficult. In fact, as you know, in 2004, when we went to the Titanic, we did it live to the world. So it's a piece of cake, piece of cake. And so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at taking this telepresent technology and being able to come to the world with our satellite links, as we're now doing with the Nautilus, and coming into the Inner Space Center down on the lower campus. Because the promise that we've made to our sponsors, which is an amazing promise, is that our ship of exploration will go where no one has gone before on planet Earth. I just love saying that. Go where no one's gone on planet Earth. And if we make a discovery, we will just deliver the best mind in America to that point of discovery within 30 minutes. So we have this kind of telepresent technology. This is our Inner Space Center. You got to come down. You're always welcome at the Inner Space Center. Don't think it's a place you can't come. Please come down to the Inner Space Center. Dwight Coleman's here tonight as the director. We just got several thousand people coming tomorrow, so I hope you're ready. But come, we have actually the Okeanos Explorer is exploring right now, the other ship of exploration. The Nautilus will be back in the field exploring in July and August and September, so please come and say hello. We really love to have visitors come in and see what we're doing, because this, to me, is the future of telepresence, actually creating underwater museums. There's more history in the deep sea than all the museums of the world combined, and we're a global leader in the development of this technology. And this is what when we were doing it live in 2004 down the street at Mystic Aquarium, we were able to bring people in and actually do that kind of exploration. So this is not crazy. In fact, if you get a chance, I have to put in this plug, take a dive on I-95. We just opened a wonderful exhibit center down at Mystic at the new Ocean Exploration Center. It's the largest tourist attraction in Connecticut, third largest in the state in New England, and we showcase our work from URI and the university at the Inner Space Center. It's a beautiful exhibit that just opened on the Titanic. That's cold to touch. It's beautifully done, and so we'll hope that you'll see that we can do this kind of exploration, and it has a wonderful theater to highlight URI's exploration program starting in July. So please come and have fun. So thank you, and let's surface and bring up the lights, and I think we have some questions coming my way.